never thought the mountain would show him something it was never meant to reveal. Yet there, Bigfoot was, curled into himself, a massive hand trembling inside a steel trap meant for wolves. And when the creature lifted its eyes toward the mountain boy, tears streaking through the fur, Ryan understood one thing instantly. This wasn't a beast to fear, but a soul begging for someone, anyone, to help. What he did next went against every rule the mountain had ever taught him. The day had started like any other high on the ridge, thin air scraping against Ryan's lungs, frost clinging to the cabin windows, and the wind moving through the pines like a voice too old to remember words. He'd woken early, breath puffing in the dimness, stoking the stove until orange light warmed the cramped room. Rust, his loyal old dog, stretched beside the bed with a groan, as if annoyed winter had returned overnight. Ryan pulled on his worn boots, stepped outside, and felt the familiar cold seep through the seams. It was an ordinary morning, until it wasn't. He took the southern trail first, the one that dipped toward the stream where his snares sometimes caught a rabbit if luck felt generous. Snow lay thick on the path, hiding roots and stones beneath its quiet surface. Ryan walked slowly, alert to the forest's signals. The mountain had moods. You learned to listen, or you didn't last long. Rust trotted ahead, nose down, tail low. Every so often the dog paused, glancing back at Ryan as if checking in. "I'm coming," Ryan muttered, though his mind wandered. Winter supplies were running low again. He'd need to ration harder. About halfway to the creek, Rust stopped dead. His entire posture changed, ears sharp, body angled toward the deeper woods. A low growl rolled from his chest. Ryan followed his gaze, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No rabbit darting, no branch falling, no familiar prints of deer. Just stillness, heavy stillness. "Easy," Ryan murmured, stepping beside the dog. Then he heard it, a sound so faint he almost mistook it for wind. A whimper, not human, not wolf. Something deeper, rougher, threaded with pain. Rust growled again, softer now, a warning wrapped in worry. Ryan's heart thudded once, hard. He'd heard strange noises on the mountain before, but this one tugged at something inside him. A sound that didn't belong here. A sound that didn't want to be heard. He tightened his grip on his lantern and moved off the trail, snow crunching beneath his boots. Rust followed, tense but obedient. The forest shifted as they pushed farther in, the pines thickening, shadows gathering like secrets. The whimper came again, louder this time, trembling at the edges. Ryan couldn't tell if it was close or echoing from somewhere deeper. When he reached the clearing, he stopped so abruptly that Rust bumped into the back of his leg. Ryan stared, breath crystallizing in the air. At the far end of the clearing, half hidden beneath a fallen log, lay a massive figure, larger than any bear, broader than any man, fur matted with snow and blood, shoulders rising and falling with labored breath, and its leg caught in a steel trap, a trap big enough to hold a wolf. Only this was no wolf. It was Bigfoot, real, terrifying, impossible, and crying. The creature's huge shoulders shuddered with each silent sob, tears cutting dark paths through the fur on its face. Its massive hand trembled inside the grip of the trap, claws coated in frost. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. He'd seen animals in traps before, foxes, rabbits, even a cougar once, but never anything like this. The creature made another low, broken sound, something between agony and fear. Rust stayed behind Ryan, body pressed close, tail tucked but not afraid, just uncertain. Ryan whispered, barely audible, "What happened to you?" He knew the trap. Hunters from the valley set them illegally sometimes, ignoring warnings and laws. They didn't care what suffered as long as they got their prize. But this creature wasn't prey. It wasn't even supposed to exist outside of whispered stories and blurry photographs pinned to gas station walls. Yet here it was, bleeding quietly into the snow. Ryan took a slow breath. He had two choices: walk away and pretend he'd never seen it, or help. Both choices felt dangerous. Both carried consequences he couldn't predict, but turning away made him feel small in a way he hated. He raised his hands slowly, palms exposed. "Easy," he murmured, voice steady in a way he didn't feel. The creature lifted its head, eyes locking onto his. Deep, dark, ancient eyes filled with pain and fear and something else, pleading. Ryan's chest tightened. The snow around the trap was splattered with blood, still warm enough not to freeze. That meant the creature had fought the trap for a long time. Hours, maybe. Maybe since before sunrise. "I won't hurt you," Ryan whispered, though the words felt too small for the moment. The creature shifted slightly, muscles tensing, but it didn't lunge, didn't growl. It only watched him. Rust edged closer to sniff the air, then whined softly, a sound of sympathy. Ryan sank to one knee, the cold biting his skin even through the layers. He inspected the trap. It was heavy steel, jaws thick, teeth sharp enough to hold anything. He'd need leverage to open it, and strength, more than he had alone. But he had to try. Slowly, he reached for the metal. The creature flinched, breath hissing through its teeth. Ryan stopped. "It's okay," he whispered. "Just me." He spoke softly, gently, as if calming a frightened dog. The creature watched him with wide, wary eyes. Then slowly, agonizingly slowly, it relaxed its arm, giving him access to the mechanism. That was trust. Trust given to someone who didn't deserve it, but needed it desperately. Ryan positioned his hands, bracing his foot against the trap. Sweat broke across his forehead, despite the cold. He pushed. The metal groaned but didn't move. He tried again, teeth clenched. Still nothing. "Come on," he gasped under his breath, forcing every ounce of strength through his arms. Rust barked once in alarm when the trap snapped louder, but didn't open. Ryan's muscles trembled. The Bigfoot whimpered, head dropping low. The sound tore through him. "I'm not giving up," Ryan muttered. He repositioned again, changed his angle, pushed with everything he had. This time the trap shifted, just slightly, but enough. Ryan gritted his teeth, pushed harder. The jaws slowly, painfully, began to separate. The creature pulled its leg free with a choked cry. The moment its limb was free, Ryan released the trap and stumbled backward, panting. The creature curled protectively around its injured leg, breathing in harsh, uneven bursts. The wound was bad. Blood soaked into the snow in a spreading red halo. Ryan didn't move closer immediately. He waited, letting the creature understand he wasn't a threat. Rust sat beside him, leaning into his side for warmth and courage. The forest was silent, watching. Ryan finally asked softly, "Can you stand?" The creature didn't try. It only shook its head, small, defeated. Ryan swallowed hard. He knew what needed to happen. Leaving the creature here meant death. Wolves would smell the blood. The cold would drain its strength, and the trap had torn deep, too deep to ignore. "I can bring you to my cabin," he whispered. "Just for the night. Just until you're better." The creature's eyes flicked up to him, something like disbelief glimmering there. Ryan took off his coat, exposing his thin sweater to the frigid air, and wrapped it around the creature's leg. The Bigfoot winced but didn't pull away. Trust again. Fragile, trembling trust. To move the creature, he'd need help from gravity. He cleared snow around its body, grabbing a fallen branch to use as leverage, creating a makeshift sled with an old tarp he always carried. Rust circled anxiously, whining every time Ryan strained. The creature watched him silently, occasionally making a pained rumble deep in its chest. It took nearly 20 minutes just to position the creature onto the tarp, each movement careful, slow, exhausting. By the time he was ready to pull, Ryan's arms burned, breath sharp and thin. Dragging the creature through the forest was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The tarp caught on roots and snow mounds, forcing him to backtrack, shift angles, and try again. Rust stayed close, sometimes trotting ahead to scout, sometimes lingering behind the tarp as if guarding the creature. Ryan's breath fogged the air in ragged bursts. His legs shook. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Something in him refused. He'd spent so much of his life wishing someone would come back for him. Now he could be that someone, for something forgotten and hurting. As they neared the cabin, the creature stirred more, often, groaning softly, pain rippling through its enormous frame. "Almost there," Ryan said hoarsely. When the cabin finally came into view, relief washed over him so strong his knees nearly buckled. He pulled the tarp onto the porch, snow blowing against the wooden boards. The creature's breaths came fast and shallow. Rust pushed the door open with his nose, and warm air spilled out, carrying the comforting smell of burning wood. Ryan guided the creature inside, dragging the tarp over the floorboards until the heat reached them both. Inside, the cabin seemed too small to hold something so large and wounded, but the creature collapsed gratefully beside the stove, curling its arms around its injured leg. Ryan grabbed blankets, water, anything he could think of. He cleaned the wound carefully, whispering reassurance whenever the creature tensed. Rust settled beside it, tail curled around his paws. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside, something strange and fragile formed, an unspoken pact carved in pain and kindness. Ryan worked until his hands shook. The creature lifted its head once, meeting Ryan's eyes. Tears still clung to the fur on its cheeks, not from fresh pain, Ryan realized, but from fear, from loneliness, from being trapped and helpless in a world that hunted anything different. Ryan felt a heaviness settle in his chest. "You're safe now," he whispered. "As long as you're here, you're safe." The creature blinked slowly, then lowered its head onto its uninjured arm. It exhaled a long, shuddering breath, the sound of someone letting go because they finally could. Ryan tended the wound again, wrapping it tightly. The creature didn't resist. It watched him with exhausted gratitude. The fire crackled softly. Rust leaned his head against Ryan's leg, sensing the shift in the room. For the first time since finding the creature, Ryan allowed himself to breathe deeply, to believe he'd done something right. Outside, the storm built strength again, wind pushing against the walls, but inside the warmth grew, settling into the corners of the small home like a fragile miracle. As night slipped deeper, the creature drifted into a troubled but steady sleep. Ryan sat beside it, too wired to rest, one hand resting lightly on its arm. He stared into the fire, thoughts tangled and heavy. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, whether the creature's family would come, whether hunters would track the blood, whether the mountain itself would punish him for interfering. But one thing he knew with absolute clarity: he couldn't look away from someone who needed him. Not again. Not this time. And somewhere in the dark outside, something else was listening. Dawn came slowly, bleeding gray light through the frosted window, painting everything in soft, tired colors. Ryan's eyes burned. He dozed in the chair for minutes at a time, never fully surrendering to sleep. Every so often he'd glance at the creature, half afraid it would be gone, as if the night had only been a story. But it was still there, massive and oddly vulnerable, chest rising and falling in a deep, steady rhythm now. Rust snored beside its arm, nose tucked into fur as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. Carefully, Ryan unwrapped the makeshift bandage. The wound was ugly, angry red lines where steel teeth had crushed flesh. But it wasn't bleeding anymore. The swelling worried him, though he didn't know enough to name why. He cleaned it again with warmed water, fingers gentle, apologizing under his breath each time the creature flinched. It watched him quietly, eyes clearer than last night. The panic softened into something like weary curiosity. "Yeah, I know," Ryan murmured. "I'm no doctor. You're stuck with a mountain kid and a busted first aid kit." The creature made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a sigh. Rust lifted his head at the noise, then relaxed again when no danger followed. Ryan sat back on his heels, flexing his sore fingers. Outside, wind rattled the cabin, knocking loose bits of ice from the roof. The radio on the shelf stayed silent. He hadn't turned it on in months. People talked too much, he'd learned. The mountain, at least, knew how to keep a secret. But this secret was bigger than anything he'd ever held. He studied the creature in the full light of morning. It was huge even lying down, muscles thick under the fur, scars crisscrossing its arms and shoulders. Old battles, old survival. Its hand, resting near the stove, was nearly the size of Ryan's whole chest. Yet its eyes, when they met his, were not the eyes of a mindless beast. There was pain there, yes, and memory, but also thought, consideration. Ryan swallowed. "You're not supposed to be real," he said quietly. "But you are, and somebody down there tried to catch you like a wolf." The idea made something cold crawl up his spine. Hunters setting traps for legends, for trophies, for proof. He imagined them following blood in the snow, tracking near his cabin. A boy alone on the ridge wasn't worth visiting. A wounded Bigfoot. That might bring the kind of men who cut everything they didn't understand. He stood abruptly, heart picking up speed. "We can't let them find you," he said. The creature watched, brow furrowing slightly. Ryan paced once, thinking. The trap site, the blood. If he could erase some of it, maybe the trail would fade. Rust hopped up, stretching, as if ready for whatever came next. Ryan grabbed his coat, boots scraping the floor. He hesitated at the door, glancing back. "I'll be back soon," he told the creature. Don't try to walk yet, okay?" The Bigfoot blinked slowly, then did something that startled him. It lifted one massive hand and pointed to its chest, then toward the window, toward the trees, then back to Ryan, as if drawing an invisible line between them. Ryan's breath caught. "Yeah," he whispered. "We're connected now. I get it." Outside, the air slapped him awake. The snow had crusted overnight, the top layer hard enough to hold Rust's lighter weight, but breaking under Ryan's boots. He followed yesterday's drag marks at first, the long scars in the snow from hauling the creature, then veered toward the clearing where he'd found it. His legs protested, muscles sore, but urgency pushed him on. When he reached the place, his stomach clenched. The trap lay where he'd left it, twisted slightly from his struggle. But that wasn't what made his pulse spike. It was the tracks. Boot prints, human, at least 2 different sizes. They circled the trap site, overlapping his own. Someone had come after he left. Maybe before he got the creature home. Maybe during. His mind raced. Had they followed the blood trail up toward the cabin and turned back? Could they tell he'd dragged something massive away? He knelt, tracing one of the impressions with gloved fingers. The edges were sharp, not old. "Great," he muttered. "Just what we needed." Rust growled low, nose pointed downhill, toward the direction of town. Ryan's first instinct was to smash the trap into scrap with a rock, but broken steel still told a story. Instead, he forced the jaws open again, hands aching, and reset it loosely, then partially buried the mechanism so it looked untouched. If the hunters came back, they'd find an empty trap and a lot of trampled snow. Maybe they'd think whatever they'd caught had chewed its own leg off and limped into the depths of the woods. He grabbed a handful of snow and scrubbed at his own tracks, smearing them into confusion. On his way back, every shadow looked like a man, every crack of ice like a gun cocking. He kept his head low, breath shallow, listening for voices. None came. By the time the cabin appeared between the trees, his nerves felt like frayed rope. He pushed inside fast, shutting the door with a care that bordered on reverence. The creature lifted its head immediately, nostrils flaring. Ryan stamped the snow from his boots, forcing a steadiness he didn't quite own. "We're okay," he said. "For now, anyway." Rust shook himself vigorously, sending droplets everywhere. He warmed water, added a little broth, and set it within reach of the creature. It drank slowly, exhaustion etched into every movement. Ryan sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the wall, watching both door and window. "There were people near the trap," he said quietly, more to himself than anything else. "Hunters, poachers, whatever you call them." The creature's gaze sharpened at the word, as if recognizing the shape of the danger, even without understanding the language. It rumbled low in its chest, a sound that made the tiny cabin feel even smaller. Hours slipped by. Ryan checked the wound again, applied some antiseptic cream he'd been saving, and wrapped it with cleaner bandages. The creature bore it with a stoic patience that reminded him of old-timers in town, men who'd lost fingers to frostbite and joked about it later. Once, when Ryan's hands shook from fatigue, the Bigfoot reached out and steadied his wrist gently, huge fingers surprisingly careful. The touch grounded him. "Thanks," Ryan muttered, embarrassed by how close he'd come to falling apart. Rust sighed dramatically, as if reminding them both to breathe. Around mid-afternoon, a sound snapped the fragile calm, a distant engine, faint but unmistakable. A truck somewhere below on the old logging road. Ryan stiffened. Very few people came up this way when snow was thick. He crossed to the window, angling himself so he could see without being seen. Through the trees, far down the slope, he caught a glimpse of movement, 2 figures on foot, weaving between the trunks, following a path that made his stomach lurch. They were coming roughly along the line from the trap, toward him, toward the cabin. Panic fluttered in his chest like a trapped bird. He turned back to the creature, mind racing. There was no way to hide something that big inside 4 thin walls, not if someone decided to look closely. But the mountain had its own hiding places, and he knew one of them well. "Can you stand?" he asked, voice tight. The Bigfoot shifted, teeth baring briefly as pain flared, then pushed up on its arms. Its injured leg trembled but held some weight. Ryan moved under one massive arm, bracing, grunting with the load. "Just a little. Come on." They half hobbled, half staggered out the back, away from the path hunters would naturally follow to the front door. Rust darted ahead, then circled back, guiding them toward a thicket Ryan had cleared in the summer. Behind it, a narrow cut in the rock led to a shallow cave, a mere dent in the hillside, invisible unless you knew. He'd once hidden there from a storm so fierce he thought the sky would split. Now he prayed it would hide something far more noticeable. The creature squeezed sideways through the gap, shoulders scraping stone, breath ragged. Inside, the space widened just enough for the Bigfoot to crouch, back against cold rock. Rust slipped in and flopped down at its side as if to say, "This is the safest spot we have." Ryan knelt in the entrance, heart hammering. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Ridiculous, giving instructions to a legend. But the creature nodded, actually nodded, eyes serious, hand resting lightly on Rust's back. Ryan backed out of the cut, pulled branches into place, and kicked snow over his own tracks until the path looked like nothing more than an animal trail. Back at the cabin, the silence felt sharper. He threw another couple of logs into the stove, more for the illusion of normalcy than warmth, then forced himself to sit at the table, hands around an empty mug. Voices drifted faintly through the woods, male, laughing, too casual for this much snow. Ryan's jaw tightened. Through the window, he finally saw them clearly. Two men in heavy jackets, rifles slung over their shoulders, faces ruddy with cold. One he recognized from town, the kind of man who always looked past him like he wasn't there. They didn't knock. They just walked around the cabin slowly, scanning the snow, talking too low for him to catch every word. Once, one of them crouched near the porch, finger tracing a half-melted print. Ryan's heart stopped. But whatever the man saw, it didn't resolve into what it really was in his mind. He shook his head, muttered something dismissive, and stood. After an eternity of circling and peering into trees, they moved off uphill, away from the cave, toward where the drag marks had ended. Rust's distant growl vibrated in Ryan's memory. Eventually the sound of their voices faded, swallowed by the mountain. Ryan waited longer still, counting breaths, listening for any crack of branches or crunch of boots. Nothing. Finally, he let himself move. The relief almost made his knees buckle as he slipped back toward the hidden cut. Inside the cave, the Bigfoot and Rust were exactly where he'd left them. The creature's eyes lifted as he entered, searching his face. "They're gone," Ryan said softly. "For now, you're safe." For the first time, he saw the giant's shoulders truly relax. He helped the creature back to the cabin as the light thinned toward evening. Each step seemed stronger than the last, the wound still ugly but no longer stealing all its strength. When they settled again by the stove, an exhausted peace settled over the room. The fire cast long, flickering shadows of boy and beast and dog on the walls, three shapes that shouldn't have belonged together, yet did. Ryan sat close, feeling warmth seep into his sore muscles. "I don't know why the mountain chose me to find you," he murmured, "but I won't let them take you." The creature watched him with deep, glistening eyes, and in that quiet, something old and wounded inside both of them began, finally, to heal.